The radio crackled to life at 11:47 p.m., and Marcus Hale had exactly 4 seconds to decide whether the governor of Virginia was going to die tonight. His hands were already moving across the console before the decision had fully formed in his mind, fingers dancing over the touchscreen display of the TMC, the Traffic Management Center, where the city of Richmond stretched out before him in glowing green and amber threads, a nervous system laid bare under fluorescent light. Every arterial road, every on-ramp, every intersection with a signal he could manipulate from this chair, it was all his. Had always been his, in the way that only the invisible ever truly possess anything. Unit 7, say again, he said into his headset, his voice flat and professional, the voice he'd spent 11 years perfecting in this room. Static. Then, diverting northbound on Broad, recommend you push a green wave on the alternate, we've gotta, the signal dissolved into white noise. Marcus looked at the incident report blinking in the upper left quadrant of his primary monitor. A 3-car collision on I-64 westbound had been called in 17 minutes ago. He pulled up camera 34C on the secondary monitor. The motorcade was visible 3 blocks south, a string of dark SUVs moving through the city's pale nocturnal glow, the kind of motorcade that makes civilians on the sidewalk stop and crane their necks, wondering who it is, not really caring but needing to look anyway. The lead vehicle's headlights cut clean arcs through a light November rain. Somewhere in the middle of that formation was the governor herself, 59 years old, the first woman to hold the office in the state's history. His phone buzzed. The burner. The one he kept in the left pocket of his jacket, the pocket he never put anything else in because he could not risk confusing it with his personal phone in a moment of stress. The message was 4 words, Meridian. 22 minutes. Now. Marcus closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. He'd counted this out once, calculated that 2 seconds was the longest he could afford to let his attention drift from the board during active operations. He thought about Maya. Maya, who had been 7 years old the last time he'd held her, who had brown eyes the exact color of the coffee he was always drinking, who had called him daddy in a way that made the word sound like something holy, something that existed outside the regular taxonomy of language. Maya, who the official record said had died in a house fire in Fredericksburg 4 years ago along with her mother, Diane. Marcus had been the one to identify the remains. Marcus Hale, traffic controller, the man nobody saw, the invisible hand that moved 10,000 cars a day through the capillaries of a mid-sized American city, this man, this invisible man, sat in his chair and looked at his board and felt the full weight of what he was about to do settle across his shoulders like weather. He could justify it on paper, and Maya might be alive, and 60 seconds was not a long time, and nobody gets hurt. His hand hovered over the keyboard. He began to type. So he typed the routing change into the system, flagged it as a traffic flow optimization in response to the I-64 incident, and watched the motorcade's path on his secondary monitor as the updated route pushed through to the state police escort's GPS system. The lead vehicle began to turn south toward Meridian Street. Marcus Hale's hands were completely steady. This was the most frightening thing about himself that he had discovered in 42 years of living, that when the moment came, his hands were always steady. The convoy was 3 blocks from the intersection at Meridian and Franklin. 30 seconds. He thought about Maya's laugh, the way it always started slightly too late, like she was catching up to the joke. 20 seconds. 10 seconds. The burner in his jacket buzzed, in position. 5 seconds. The motorcade reached the intersection of Meridian and Franklin, and nothing happened. Marcus blinked. Nothing. No flicker in the cameras. No signal anomaly on his board. The convoy moved through the intersection and continued north, exactly as it should. Then his personal phone buzzed again. A text message, from a number he didn't recognize. Check the TMC's internal diagnostic log. Right now. Subprocess 7734. The log showed that subprocess 7734 had been accessed from an external IP address at 11:49 p.m., 2 minutes ago. The access had lasted 63 seconds. The access had not been authorized by any TMC personnel, including Marcus. He stared at the log. He felt something he hadn't felt in years, the sensation of being on a board, moving pieces, while someone else watched from a position he couldn't perceive. He had been a relay node. And Meridian Street had been the distraction. 3 weeks earlier, before the Waffle House and the photograph and the burner phone, Marcus had been standing in the break room of the TMC when Director Carl Sutton walked in with a man from the governor's office and introduced him to the man as our overnight supervisor, which was not what Marcus was. Marcus was a senior traffic control specialist, and the distinction was not merely semantic, it was the difference between a man who was recognized for specific expertise and a man who kept the lights on while everyone else went home. He had said nothing. He had poured his coffee and allowed himself to be invisible. He had a gift, he understood this about himself without vanity, the way a person with perfect pitch understands that they hear something others don't, for systems. For traffic systems specifically, for the way a city's movement was essentially a massive computation running in real time, a problem of optimization and flow and the management of friction. He had spent 11 years becoming better at solving this problem than anyone else in the Virginia Department of Transportation's Region 4 district, which moved approximately 340,000 vehicles per day through a network of 847 signalized intersections, and what the department's annual report called legacy infrastructure challenges, and what Marcus called time bombs. He had applied for the position of Traffic Operations Manager in 2021 and been told the position required demonstrated leadership experience, which he did not have because nobody had ever given him the opportunity to demonstrate it. He had applied again in 2023 and been told the position had been filled, internally, by a man named Jeffrey Marsh who had been with the department for 4 years and whose primary qualification appeared to be that he was Carl Sutton's golf partner's nephew. Marcus had documented both of these outcomes in a folder on his home computer, along with the performance reviews that called him competent and technically excellent and lacking in interpersonal initiative. After the fire, there had been therapy, mandated, through the Employee Assistance Program, and Marcus had gone to 8 sessions with a woman named Dr. Patricia Elmore who had soft eyes and a corner office full of succulents and who had told him that grief expressed as hyper-control of environmental systems was a recognized response pattern, and that the obsessive attention he paid to his work was both an asset and a way of not dealing with his loss, and that eventually he would need to find a way to live in a world that was genuinely unmanageable. Marcus had listened, had not disagreed with a single word of it, and had stopped going after the 8th session because the succulents were making him sad. He had been living this life, clean, reduced, sealed, for nearly 4 years when Devlin Cross had sat down across from him in the Waffle House and blown the whole thing open. Cross had said, "Your daughter is alive, and the fire was set deliberately, and the body you identified wasn't Maya, and if you want Maya back you are going to do exactly one thing on exactly one night." He had said, "You are going to route the governor's motorcade down Meridian Street." He had said, "There will be a digital event. Non-violent. Nobody gets hurt. We just need the data." 60 seconds. Marcus had asked, "How do I know Maya is alive?" Cross had set his coffee cup down, very precisely, in the center of the paper placemat, and reached into his jacket and produced a photograph, which he slid across the table without speaking. Marcus had looked at it for a long time. Maya, unmistakably Maya, brown eyes, and the small scar above her left eyebrow from the time she'd fallen off her bike at age 5, holding a newspaper. The newspaper's date was 3 weeks ago. He had kept his face still. Infrastructure had to hold. The thing about the photograph was that Marcus had studied it for nearly an hour after getting home that night. He'd set it on his kitchen table under the brightest lamp and looked at every detail, Maya's posture, the newspaper, the quality of the light. He had 2 shoe boxes in his closet containing every photograph of Maya he'd taken in the first 7 years of her life, and he had looked at all of those too, spreading them across the table in a kind of desperate archaeology, trying to find a discrepancy, trying to find the seam where a forgery would show itself. He had not found one. In the 2 hours following the motorcade's passage through the North Corridor, Marcus did 4 things. He filed his end-of-shift incident report with scrupulous accuracy. He reviewed the diagnostic log 3 more times, photographing his monitor with his personal phone. He sent a single text to the unknown number, "We need to talk." He received no reply. And he sat in his car in the TMC parking lot for 27 minutes after his shift ended, watching the rain fall on Richmond and understanding that he was in a situation whose true architecture he had not been shown. The next morning, he ran his 3 miles through the wet streets and thought about what he knew versus what he'd been told. He knew, the interception had occurred through the Corridor 7 relay before his rerouting. This meant, the meridian diversion had been irrelevant to the actual operation. Which meant, either Cross hadn't known, or Cross had known, and the rerouting had been designed to produce Marcus's complicity, documented in the TMC's routing logs, achievable by anyone who requested those logs under FOIA, hanging over him now like a chandelier on a fraying wire. Marcus ran harder. The hill on Libby Avenue pushed back against him, and he pushed back against it. He finished his run, showered, made coffee, and sat at his kitchen table with the shoebox of photographs and the Waffle House photograph and his personal phone and the burner phone, all laid out before him in what he privately acknowledged was a gesture toward control over a situation that was not, in fact, under control. The photograph of Maya could be real. It could be fabricated. The left-handedness proved nothing by itself. But it was a detail that landed differently than the others, a detail whose presence made the photograph feel less like a production and more like evidence. My name is Renata Voss. I'm a special agent with the FBI's Richmond field office. I am not calling in an official capacity and this call is not recorded. The routing change you made last night, we know about it. We also know it wasn't the breach. The breach happened upstream of your action and downstream of Corridor 7. Don't alter any logs. Don't contact Devlin Cross. If anyone from the governor's security detail reaches out to you, you tell them the routing change was a standard operational decision based on the I-64 incident, which it technically was, and you refer them to your incident report. Marcus looked at the photograph of Maya on his kitchen table. Was the girl in the photograph real? Longer pause. Mr. Hale, was she real? The photograph is real, Renata Voss said. The narrative around it is complicated. You're going to have to do better than that. I know. I do. The girl in that photograph is alive. I can tell you that. I can't tell you anything else right now, and I know that's not enough, and I'm telling you it's the best I can do tonight and I'm asking you to trust that the rest is coming. Marcus held the phone and looked at Maya's eyes in the photograph. How long, he said. 24 hours. Maybe less. Marcus sat at his kitchen table for a long time after that, with the rain starting again outside and the city of Richmond computing itself around him, its million daily problems of flow and friction resolving and representing while he sat still in the eye of it, this invisible man, this man who kept the lights green for people who didn't know his name, He thought about systems. About how the most elegant systems are the ones that look simple from outside and are, in fact, deeply complex, where the design has deliberately hidden its complexity. He thought about whether he'd been a tool in this system or a participant. He thought, in the most elegant systems, the distinction is academic. By 9 a.m. Thursday, 3 things had happened in rapid, overlapping sequence. First, Governor Hargrove had announced she would not be holding the anticipated press conference. Second, a source described only as familiar with federal law enforcement activity in the region, had told the Richmond Times-Dispatch that there had been a significant cybersecurity incident involving state government communications infrastructure on Wednesday night, and that the FBI was involved. Third, Jeffrey Marsh had arrived at the TMC at 8:30 a.m. and had been in Carl Sutton's office with the door closed ever since. Marcus drank his coffee and watched the news and ran the calculations. He was back at his station when Denise Cho appeared at his shoulder. Denise's expression had the careful neutrality that Marcus recognized as her version of barely contained concern. "You've got some visitors. Governor's security detail. 2 of them. They want to talk to you. About last night's routing?" "That's what they said." She held his gaze for a beat longer than necessary. "Your incident report filed clean. I reviewed it this morning. Everything's in order. It was a small thing, the kind of thing you could read many ways. Marcus read it as, I am telling you that you are covered, procedurally. The 2 members of the governor's protective detail were named Chen and Barrera, and they were professional, which is to say, very good at presenting the surface of courtesy while conducting, simultaneously, a continuous assessment of everything around them. Chen did most of the talking. She asked Marcus about the routing change. He told her what his incident report said, in the same words, without elaboration. He answered every question directly and completely and in a way that was technically accurate. Toward the end, Chen put her pen down and said, "Mr. Hale, are you familiar with a man named Devlin Cross?" Marcus's hands were steady. "No," he said. At noon, Jeffrey Marsh emerged from Carl Sutton's office and walked through the operations floor with the expression of a man who has recently been told something that rearranged his understanding of his own position. Marcus watched him from his peripheral vision, without turning, and noted that Marsh's hands were in his pockets and his jaw was set, and he left the building without speaking to anyone. At 12:47 p.m., Marcus's burner phone buzzed with a message from the same number that had contacted him the night before. "The relay data is live. She's in Richmond. Tonight, 7 p.m. 2219, Semmes Avenue. Come alone." He spent the afternoon doing his job. He adjusted signal cycles on 3 major corridors in response to a water main break on Lee Street. He managed a school dismissal that sent 800 cars into a 3-block radius at 3:15 p.m. He handled a broken-down delivery truck on Staples Mill Road. He did all of this with his usual precision and without outward evidence of the fact that the system he was running today was not just the traffic network of Richmond, Virginia, but also the internal calculation of a man trying to decide how much trust was rational and how much was simply desperation dressed in rational clothing. At 4 p.m., Denise called him into her office. She closed the door. She did not sit down. "The governor's office has formally requested your incident report. DHS is involved now." She paused. "Are you all right, Marcus?" He was startled, not by the question, but by the use of his first name. In 11 years, Denise had called him Hale, always. The first name felt like an opening, like a door ajar. "I made a standard operational decision," he said. "I know. I've read the report 4 times. I'm not asking about the report. I'm asking about you. He looked at her. There are things I can't tell you, he said. The address on Semmes Avenue was a narrow row house in Manchester, across the James River from downtown Richmond, in a neighborhood undergoing the specific kind of regeneration that meant coffee shops beside boarded windows, a few expensive renovations sitting next to original facades held together with decades of minor repairs and stubborn maintenance. The house at 2219 was one of the originals, a deep red brick with a white door, a small concrete stoop, a single light burning in the second-floor window. Marcus parked 2 blocks away, out of habit. He was early. He sat on a bench at the corner of Semmes and 22nd for 11 minutes, watching the house, watching the street. A man with a dog. A teenager on a bicycle. A woman carrying grocery bags up a stoop 3 houses down. Traffic was light, as it always was on residential streets at this hour. People were home, or heading home, the city's capillaries at their daily minimum flow. Marcus read the street the way he read his board, with the same attention, the same parsing of signal from noise. At 6:58, he got up and walked to the door at 2219. The interior of the house was sparsely furnished in the way of a space that is used for work rather than living, a few folding chairs, a table with a laptop and some documents, the absence of personal objects. 2 other people were in the room, and one of them was Renata Voss, who Marcus recognized only because he'd constructed a visual estimate from her voice and she matched it closely, tall, early 40s, the look of someone who had been doing difficult work for a long time and had found a way to carry it without it showing too much. The other person in the room, standing near the window, was Devlin Cross. Marcus stopped. The relay breach, she explained, had been the culmination of a federal investigation into a financial network that ran through the governor's office and involved state contracts, campaign finance violations, and one very specific payment to a man who had set a fire in Fredericksburg 4 years ago to prevent a particular custody hearing from taking place. The custody hearing had involved Diane Hale's activities as a paralegal for a firm that worked with one of the primary contractors in the network. Diane had been about to testify. She had been warned off. The warning had not worked. The fire had been a contingency. The fire had not been set by anyone associated with Governor Hargrove directly. He used my daughter, Marcus said. Yes, Voss said, without looking away. He's a former intelligence officer who makes decisions about leverage the way people like him always do, instrumentally, with the objective in view and the method as a secondary concern. And Cross? Marcus looked at the man across the room. Cross said, I knew your daughter was alive for 11 months. I made a calculated decision about when and how to use that information. I made that decision imperfectly. He held Marcus's gaze with the same stillness Marcus had seen in the Waffle House. That's not an apology. It's an accurate description. Keep the distinction, Marcus said. I'll know what to do with the apology if it comes. He walked to the stairs. The staircase was narrow and steep, the way old Richmond row houses always were, and the wood of the treads was worn smooth in the center from decades of ascending and descending, worn smooth in the way only time can wear things, by accumulation, by the weight of ordinary passage. Marcus put his hand on the railing and went up. The door at the top of the stairs was open. The room beyond it was small and warm, lit by a lamp on a side table, furnished with a single bed and a chair and a child's backpack propped against the wall, a small concession to normalcy. Maya was sitting in the chair. She was 11 years old now, and the child Marcus remembered was in her, the set of her shoulders, the brown eyes, the small scar above her left eyebrow, but there was also someone he didn't fully know, someone who had been built in the years of his absence, out of materials he hadn't supplied. She looked at him from the chair. She said, Daddy. The word was different. She was 11, not 7. She had grown into it and it had grown smaller in her mouth, more like something she'd learned to hold carefully. And it was still the same word. It was still the word that lived outside the taxonomy of language. Marcus crossed the room and knelt down and held his daughter, and the city of Richmond moved outside the window, its traffic flowing through corridors he would return to, its signals cycling through their patient green rhythms, its invisible infrastructure holding everything in its invisible hands, and he was not invisible now. He was here, in this room, with this child, and the rest of the world could compute itself without him for a few minutes. He held on. 6 weeks later, in December, Marcus was sitting at his board at 2 a.m. when the call came from Denise on the internal comm. "You've got a courtesy notification from the U.S. Attorney's Office. They wanted you to know before it hits the news. Tomorrow morning." "What's being charged?" "Governor's Chief of Staff. 7 others. Federal. Financial conspiracy, obstruction, witness intimidation, and what they're calling coordinated interference with protected individuals." A pause. "The governor herself is not being charged." "I know," Marcus said. "You know a lot of things you don't tell me. Occupational habit. There's something else. Marsh has been asked to step down from the operations manager position." Marcus was quiet. Internal audit flagged some procurement irregularities. Turns out the 2011 relay infrastructure that nobody wanted to replace was under a maintenance contract that ran through a firm connected to one of the indicted parties. The infrastructure report recommendations were buried on purpose. Your Corridor 7 latency flag was in there, by the way. 3 times in 3 years. In the original reports, before they were edited. Marcus looked at his board. The green and amber threads of the city, patient and constant. "The position is going to be reposted," Denise said. "In January. I want you to apply." A beat. "I'm not asking as your supervisor. I'm telling you as someone who has worked next to you for 11 years and watched you do a job better than anyone has any right to expect and never say a word about it. Apply." He thought about the folder on his computer. The performance reviews. The word initiative. He thought about the fact that he had, in the last 6 weeks, initiated more consequential action than in his entire previous career combined. "I'll apply," he said. "Good," Denise said. And in her voice was something that was simply, yes. This is right. Somewhere in Scott's edition, a child slept in a room that had her backpack against the wall and a lamp she'd chosen herself, a lamp in the shape of an elephant, purchased at a Saturday flea market on Broad Street 3 weeks ago, which Maya had held up and said, "This one," with a conviction that required no additional explanation. The lamp cast a warm amber glow that Marcus had seen from the doorway the previous night when he'd looked in on her before his shift, standing in the door of the room for a moment while she slept, his hand on the doorframe. He had stood there for longer than he meant to. She had gotten into his car, his ordinary, unremarkable car, and she had buckled her seatbelt and held the backpack in her lap and looked out the window as Richmond moved past them, the streetlights and the storefronts and the late-night traffic flowing and pausing at Marcus's own intersections, the lights that changed to green because he'd set their cycles years ago and they were still running on his calibration. "Do you actually control the traffic lights?" she asked. "I help. It's a system. I'm part of the system. So you make it so the lights know what to do?" "More or less. That seems important. People don't always notice it. That doesn't mean it isn't important." On camera 34C, the intersection at Meridian and Franklin was empty. The rain that had been forecast had not yet arrived. The streetlights burned their clean, steady amber, and the road was wet with the residue of the evening's last showers, and nothing moved on Meridian Street at this hour except the signal cycle itself, cycling through its programmed sequence, green, yellow, red, green again, in the rhythm Marcus had set, the rhythm of a system that would keep running long after this particular watchman had gone home, long after anyone thought to ask whose hands they were. He watched the light go green. He thought, it's enough. The December wind came up along the James River and moved through the streets of Richmond, and a man nobody quite noticed sat at a glowing board and held the city in his hands and let the rest of the world, finally, come back in.